The rhythmic sound of Naomi Carter's heels clicking against the polished marble floors of the private jet terminal was a melody of accomplishment. Each step carried the weight of years of sacrifice, resilience, and unshakable determination. The terminal was a realm of quiet luxury, where the elite moved with effortless entitlement. Dressed in tailored suits and designer accessories, their conversations laced with the casual confidence of generational wealth. But Naomi? She had built her success brick by brick, with hands that had known both struggle and triumph. She belonged here, not because of privilege, but because she had earned every inch of her success. Her presence was commanding yet understated, exuding power without the need for excessive display. Dressed in a navy blazer and cream-colored wide-leg trousers, she moved with the grace of a woman who knew her worth. There were no flashy logos, no extravagant jewelry, just a sleek leather carry-on in one hand and a tablet in the other. Her sharp almond-shaped eyes scanning the flight itinerary. Naomi believed in substance over spectacle. She didn't need to announce her achievements, they spoke for themselves in every room she entered. This was her private jet. The very thought sent a flicker of emotion through her. Not arrogance, not pride, but a deep, personal vindication. How many times had she been told she wouldn't make it? How many times had she been the only black woman in boardrooms filled with men who questioned whether she was in the right place? How many times had she been dismissed, underestimated, overlooked? Yet here she was, about to board her own aircraft, en route to Geneva for a business meeting that could expand her luxury goods empire into Europe. A deal that, once secured, would solidify her legacy. She approached the check-in desk with effortless confidence, where a young woman in a polished uniform greeted her with a bright but cautious smile. "Good morning, ma'am. May I assist you?" "Yes," Naomi replied, her voice smooth but firm. "I'm here for the Carter flight to Geneva." She watched as the woman's fingers danced across the keyboard, scanning the system. The briefest flicker of surprise crossed her features before she quickly masked it with professionalism. Naomi caught it immediately. She was used to it. The hesitation, the silent, inspoken question. "Is this really your jet?" "Of course, Miss Carter. Everything is in order. Your aircraft is being prepared, and the captain will meet you shortly." Naomi gave a small nod and stepped aside, her sharp gaze sweeping over the terminal. From the corner of her eye, she observed the quiet power plays happening around her, the effortless exchanges between wealthy patrons and staff, the subtle deference given to men in bespoke suits, the casual entitlement of those who had never had to fight for a seat at the table. She had learned long ago that power was unspoken. It wasn't about loud voices or dominance, it was about presence. And Naomi had presence in abundance. She glanced down at her watch. 5:47 a.m. By 7 a.m., she would be soaring at 30,000 feet. By noon, she would be shaking hands with investors who had once dismissed her. By tonight, she would be closer than ever to cementing her legacy. But she knew, deep down, that moments like this weren't just personal victories. They were something bigger. She thought about the young girl who had once looked up at airplanes, wondering what it would feel like to own one. She thought about her grandmother, who had cleaned the homes of the wealthy, dreaming of a future where her family would never have to bow their heads to anyone. She thought about every young black woman out there, told to shrink themselves, to wait their turn, to be grateful for whatever scraps they were given. And she knew, this was for them, too. Naomi's success wasn't just about breaking barriers. It was about erasing them entirely. She sighed softly, shaking herself from her thoughts. No time for reflection now, there was work to be done. She pulled out her tablet, reviewing the final details of her presentation. She was an architect of her own future. And today, she was about to build something historic. The hum of an approaching figure caught her attention. She turned just as Captain Todd Benson strode toward her, his crisp uniform and straight-backed posture radiating authority. But his eyes told a different story. There was a pause, a subtle flicker of hesitation as he took her in. The same flicker she had seen 100 times before. Naomi smiled, slow and deliberate. She knew what was coming. "Miss Carter, I presume?" He extended his hand, his tone polite, yet clipped. "That's correct," Naomi said, shaking his hand firmly. She never softened her grip. There was something in the way he looked at her, the way his gaze swept over her with quiet scrutiny, as if trying to reconcile her presence with his expectations. And then, The words that always came. In one form or another. I must admit, we don't often see private clients such as yourself. Naomi's smile didn't waver, but inside, something coiled tight. Clients such as myself? She repeated, her voice deceptively smooth. Todd hesitated for half a second too long. I just mean, it's not typical. Most of our private jet owners are. Well, they tend to have a different background. There it was. The assumption, the doubt, the underlying belief that she didn't belong in this world. Naomi inhaled deeply, her eyes locking onto his. She had fought too hard for this moment to let it be tainted by ignorance. Captain Benson, she said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Let's be very clear. I am not just present. I am the sole owner of this aircraft. If there's an issue, I suggest you state it plainly. Todd shifted on his feet, clearing his throat. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Naomi stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. And one more thing, she said, her voice lowering just enough to command absolute attention. I don't tolerate unprofessionalism, so if you have a problem with me, you might want to reconsider who really doesn't belong here. The check-in clerk froze, eyes darting between them. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted, the weight of Naomi's words settling into every corner of the space. For the first time, Todd Benson realized his mistake. Naomi turned away without another word, leaving him standing there. She had a flight to catch, a deal to secure, and an entire industry to change. As she walked toward the private lounge, her heels echoing against the marble floor, she didn't look back, because power didn't ask for permission. It took its rightful place. Captain Todd Benson had spent 15 years flying private jets for some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world. He had flown corporate moguls, royalty, Hollywood stars, and billionaires whose net worths were so high that money seemed almost irrelevant to them. He had seen them step onto their aircraft with entitlement and ease. Dressed in luxury, barely acknowledging his existence before disappearing into the cabin with a glass of champagne. He knew his clients. He knew the type. And Naomi Carter wasn't it. The moment he laid eyes on her, something in him stiffened, a reflex. A deeply ingrained response he hadn't even realized was there. A black woman in a private jet terminal. Alone. Carrying herself with power and certainty. It didn't add up. It wasn't outright disbelief. But it was doubt. A hesitation. A silent question behind his polite smile. Who are you really? He walked up to her. His steps confident. His uniform crisp and unwrinkled. Each button fastened with military precision. When he extended his hand, it was firm, too firm. A test. Would she falter? Would she shrink? Would she show, even for a second, that she didn't belong here? She didn't. Miss Carter, I presume? Her grip was just as firm as his. Her eyes met his without a flicker of doubt. That's correct, she replied, her voice steady, effortless. Todd hesitated for half a second before nodding. But that doubt, the one he couldn't quite shake, didn't leave his mind. I must admit, he continued, his tone carefully measured, we don't often see private clients such as yourself. There, he had said it, and in that moment, he saw it. The way her expression barely changed. Yet somehow everything in her presence sharpened. Her eyes locked onto him, reading him, dissecting every syllable, every flicker of hesitation behind his words. Clients such as myself? She repeated, her voice even, but laced with something beneath it. Something dangerous. Todd knew the moment he had misstepped. But there was no going back now. He forced a casual shrug, attempting to play it off. I just mean, well, it's not typical. Most of our private jet owners are. He stopped himself. But the words had already taken shape in the air between them. They hung there, unspoken but unmistakable. They don't look like you. The young woman behind the check-in desk stiffened slightly, shifting uncomfortably as the tension in the air became thicker than the polished glass windows lining the terminal. The room felt smaller now, quieter, as if the space itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Naomi didn't react, not immediately. Instead, she studied him, silent, unwavering. Todd could feel the weight of her gaze, the quiet judgment behind it, and for the first time, he felt something entirely unfamiliar, a hint of shame creeping up his spine. But pride was a funny thing. It wouldn't let him back down. Well, he tried again. I suppose I just wasn't expecting the jet owner to be present herself. Most of our clients send assistants or representatives to handle travel logistics. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into something dangerously close to amusement. Is that so? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. But somehow, she didn't need to. She let the silence stretch. Let it settle in his bones. In the very air between them. Letting him sit in the discomfort of his own words. And then, with deliberate precision, she said, Captain Benson, let's be clear. I am not only present, I am the sole owner of this aircraft. If there's an issue, I suggest you state it plainly. Todd shifted slightly, feeling trapped in his own uniform. His eyes flicked toward the check-in clerk, looking for support, but she remained rigid, her expression neutral, unwilling to step into the battle that was unfolding in front of her. The game had changed, and he was losing. Naomi's voice softened, not in weakness, but in the way a blade gleams just before it strikes. And one more thing, she continued, stepping just a little closer, lowering her voice just enough to make sure only he could hear her. I don't tolerate unprofessionalism. If you have a problem with me, you might want to reconsider who really doesn't belong here. Todd's breath caught for a fraction of a second, his grip tightening over the flight manifest in his hand. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't angry. She was stating facts. And in that moment, Todd realized he had made a mistake. A mistake that might cost him more than just his pride. Naomi turned without another word, heading toward the private lounge, her steps smooth and unbothered. She had won the conversation without ever needing to argue. And Todd? Todd remained standing there, his pulse quickened, the weight of his own assumptions pressing against him. For the first time in his career, he felt something he had never felt before. Not control, not power, but uncertainty. Because Naomi Carter wasn't just another client. She was a woman who refused to be questioned. And as much as he hated to admit it, Todd knew he had just stepped into a battle he wasn't prepared for. The jet was ready for takeoff. But by the time this flight was over, it wouldn't be Naomi's place in this world that was in question. It would be his. And neither of them was ready for what would happen next. Naomi Carter was no stranger to doubt. To the subtle ways people questioned her presence in spaces she had fought tooth and nail to enter. But today, she wasn't in the mood to let it slide. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, endured too many nights burning through exhaustion just to prove herself over and over again. She had earned every bit of success, every accolade, every deal, every single dollar that had bought the very jet she was about to board. And yet, here she was, once again, facing a man who, with a few well-placed words, had made it abundantly clear that he didn't think she belonged here. Captain Todd Benson's smirk still lingered in the air, his veiled insult hanging like a storm cloud. Clients such as yourself. He had said it so casually, as if it wasn't a knife slid between her ribs, as if it was just an innocent comment, nothing more. But Naomi had spent a lifetime recognizing the weight behind words like those. She wasn't about to let it go. She squared her shoulders, her chin tilting slightly, her presence growing, filling the space, shifting the power dynamic between them. Captain Benson, she said, her voice smooth as silk but lined with steel. I'd like you to clarify exactly what you mean by that statement. His smirk twitched, faltered. He hadn't expected her to call him out so directly. I just meant, he cleared his throat, eyes darting toward the check-in clerk as if seeking some unspoken backup. It's just uncommon, that's all. We don't often have. He hesitated again, searching for a way to backpedal without admitting to the meaning behind his words. Women? Naomi offered, arching a brow. Black women? Successful black women? His face darkened, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. That's not what I said. No, she agreed, her gaze never wavering. But that's exactly what you meant. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence was a challenge. A test. Would he double down? Would he try to justify himself? Or would he recognize that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career? Todd let out a small, forced chuckle, shaking his head. Miss Carter, I think you're reading too much into this. I didn't mean any offense. It's just that most of our high net worth clients don't typically handle these arrangements personally. They send representatives, assistants. Naomi gave him a slow, deliberate nod, as if she were carefully considering his words. Then she took one measured step closer. Captain, she said, lowering her voice just enough that only he could hear. I need you to understand something very clearly. I am not an assistant. I am not someone's plus one. I am not uncommon. I am the owner of this aircraft. The only reason you are standing here right now, wearing that uniform, preparing for this flight, is because I chose this airline and approved this crew. Do you understand me? He stiffened, his jaw locking, his nostrils flaring slightly. I understand. Good. She let the silence stretch. Let it sink into him, into his bones. Let him feel what it was like to be scrutinized, to be questioned, to have to prove himself in a space that should have been his without argument. Then she straightened, exhaling softly, rolling her shoulders back. Now, she said, her tone turning businesslike again. I trust there won't be any more confusion about my presence here? His response was clipped, stiff. No, ma'am. She could hear the resentment curling beneath his words. But that wasn't her problem. If he didn't like being held accountable, that was his own cross to bear. Naomi turned, ready to head to the private lounge, when a voice stopped her. Excuse me, Miss Carter? She turned to find the check-in clerk, the young woman who had watched the entire exchange unfold with wide, nervous eyes. The woman hesitated, glancing toward Todd, as if debating whether she should speak at all. But then she straightened her back, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what just happened. Naomi blinked. It wasn't her responsibility to ease this woman's discomfort. And yet, something inside her softened slightly. What's your name? Naomi asked. Clara. Well, Clara, Naomi said, offering a small but sincere smile. Thank you, but you don't need to apologize for someone else's ignorance. Just promise me one thing. Clara swallowed, nodding. Of course. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong somewhere. Ever. For a moment, Clara looked like she might cry. Instead, she nodded firmly, standing just a little taller. Yes, ma'am. Naomi gave her a final nod before turning away. Her steps deliberate, her focus unshaken. She was still heading to Geneva. She was still going to finalize a deal that would expand her company into a global empire. Nothing had changed, except now. She was even more determined than before. Todd Benson could see all he wanted. But Naomi Carter? She was untouchable. And as she walked away, leaving him standing there in the wake of his own failure, she knew, this wasn't just about today. This was about setting a precedent. And she had just made it crystal clear, she would not be questioned. Have you ever been in a situation where someone doubted you? Not because of your abilities, but because of their own prejudice? Let us know in the comments. Hit the like button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when others tried to put you down. And make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and triumph. Because this isn't just Naomi's story. It's all of ours. Naomi Carter walked into the private lounge, her shoulders squared, her head high. To anyone watching, she was the very image of composure, graceful, powerful, untouchable. But beneath that carefully measured exterior, she could feel the slow burn of anger simmering in her chest. She had encountered men like Captain Todd Benson before. Men who mistook their privilege for expertise. Who believed power belonged only to those who looked like them. Men who thought that a woman like her, black, successful, self-made, was some kind of anomaly. And no matter how many times she proved herself, no matter how many records she shattered, no matter how many millions she earned, there was always one more door to break down. One more person questioning whether she deserved to be there. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing herself to stay focused. This wasn't about Benson's ignorance. This was about what came next. A quiet tension lingered in the lounge as Naomi sank into one of the sleek leather chairs, setting her tablet on the table in front of her. Around her, other elite travelers sipped their coffee, murmuring about their investments, their luxury retreats, their next big ventures. No one seemed to notice the battle she had just fought in the terminal. But somewhere nearby, Benson was still seething. She could feel it. She could sense it. And she was right. Outside, past the glass walls separating the lounge from the tarmac, Benson stood near a young flight crew member. His body rigid with frustration. His jaw was tight. His hands balled into fists at his sides. And though his voice was low, Naomi could tell he wasn't done. The young crew member, a first officer, barely into his 20s, shifted uncomfortably, darting glances toward the lounge. He looked torn, like someone caught between knowing what was right and not wanting to anger his superior. "I don't care who she is," Benson muttered, his voice sharp with barely concealed irritation. "Something about this whole thing feels off. You really think someone like her just owns a jet like that?" The first officer hesitated, visibly. "Sir," he said carefully, "her paperwork is in order. The flight clearance came directly from corporate. She's the owner. Sir, there's no reason to doubt her." Benson let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Please," he scoffed. "I've been in this business for 15 years. I know how this world works. People like her." He stopped himself, lowering his voice even further. "She doesn't fit the profile." The first officer stiffened, his discomfort deepening. "With all due respect, sir, she built one of the largest luxury brands in the country. She's worth—" "I don't give a damn what she's worth," Benson cut in, his voice dripping with quiet contempt. "I'm telling you, this doesn't add up. I'm going to do my own checks. If there's something off, we'll find out soon enough." The first officer faltered, his gaze flicking back toward the lounge, where Naomi sat, unaware of the conversation but fully aware of the prejudice lurking beneath the surface. Because that was the real problem, wasn't it? Not that she didn't belong, but that Benson refused to believe she could. Inside the lounge, Naomi's growing resolve. Naomi could feel the weight of unspoken judgment pressing against her. Even now, long after she had left Benson standing in the terminal. It wasn't just about him. It was about the system that had conditioned men like him to see women like her as the exception rather than the rule. How many times had she walked into boardrooms only to be mistaken for an assistant? How many times had she been told, "You're so impressive for someone your age," when what they really meant was, "You're impressive for a black woman in this space." How many times had she worked twice as hard, achieved twice as much, only to be asked to prove herself all over again? She exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders back. This wasn't just about her. This was about every young black girl who would come after her. Stepping into spaces they were never supposed to occupy. Breaking barriers no one wanted to see broken. She refused to let Todd Benson, or anyone like him, diminish what she had built. Her phone buzzed against the table. She glanced down. A message from Leonard Hayes, her longtime friend and business partner. "Leonard, everything okay? Heard there was a situation at the terminal." She smirked slightly, shaking her head. Of course he had already heard. She typed back, "Naomi handled it, but you might get a call soon. Captain Benson isn't happy." Within seconds, Leonard's reply came through. "Leonard. Then he's about to be even less happy. I'll take care of it." She let out a quiet breath. There was something comforting about knowing she had people in her corner, powerful people who wouldn't let injustice slide. Still, she wasn't about to let this moment pass without action. She picked up her tablet and pulled up an email draft. To Elite Aviation Corporate. Subject: Urgent, incident report regarding Captain Benson. And then she began typing. Every word was deliberate, every detail precise. By the time she was finished, there would be no room for excuses. Benson would be held accountable. Because she had learned long ago that waiting for change wasn't an option. Sometimes, you had to demand it. A call to action. Naomi Carter's story isn't just about her. It's about every single person who has ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, not because of their talent, not because of their work ethic, but because of someone else's ignorance. If you've ever had to fight for your place in a world that underestimated you, this story is for you. If you've ever been told you're not the right fit, if you've ever had to work twice as hard to get half the credit, if you've ever walked into a room and felt the unspoken doubt weighing against you, you are not alone. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to prove yourself when you shouldn't have had to. Hit the like button if you believe in holding people accountable for their actions. And most importantly, subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and triumph. Because this isn't just Naomi's fight. It's all of ours. Naomi Carter sat in her private lounge, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The tension from her encounter with Captain Todd Benson still lingered in the air like an unspoken challenge. But she wasn't shaken. She had built herself for moments like this, for battles she had never asked for but knew she would always have to fight. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? When you were a black woman in a space that wasn't built for you, you didn't just get to succeed, you had to defend your right to be there. Naomi had fought too hard to get where she was. She had sacrificed sleep, poured every ounce of her energy into building her business, and made decisions most people wouldn't have the courage to make. So when men like Todd Benson, men who believed that money, power, and access only belonged to people who looked like them, tried to question her, she didn't back down. She didn't cower. She stood her ground. She set her coffee aside, picked up her phone, and scrolled through her contacts until she reached the name she was looking for. Michael Connors, CEO. Elite Aviation. She tapped the number. The line rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered. Naomi, what a surprise. Are you already in the air? Not yet, Naomi said, her voice even. I had an interesting encounter with one of your pilots. There was a pause. I see. Tell me what happened. So she did. Every detail. She told him about the moment of hesitation in Benson's handshake. The way he questioned her presence. The implication that someone like her didn't belong in the world of private jet ownership. She told him how Benson hadn't outright refused to fly her, but he had made it clear that he didn't believe she was worthy of the seat she had bought, paid for, and earned. By the time she finished, Connors was silent. And then, in a tone sharper than before, he asked, "Where is Captain Benson right now?" Naomi exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. He's still on the ground. But, Michael, I'm not just telling you this for an apology. I'm telling you this because I want action. Another pause. You know I take these things seriously. Naomi. Then prove it. And she waited. Because this was the real test. Wasn't it? Not whether she could stand up for herself, but whether the system would stand up for her. Holding power accountable. Within 20 minutes, Benson was pulled from the flight. Naomi knew the moment it happened. She watched from the lounge window as a senior flight manager approached him near the jet stairs. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she saw it all unfold. The way Benson's face shifted, first irritation, then shock, then a dawning realization that he had miscalculated. Naomi didn't look away. She watched him process it. Watched him reckon with the fact that the world wasn't going to bend for him this time. Because this time, he had messed with the wrong woman. A woman who wouldn't be quiet. A woman who had power, and knew how to use it. After a few more tense words, Benson turned abruptly and walked away from the jet. His jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Naomi leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a small, satisfied smile. She had made her point. She had forced accountability. The aftermath, a shift in the industry. The next day, Elite Aviation released a statement. They didn't name names, but they acknowledged the incident. They stated that they had a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, that they were implementing new diversity training for all staff, and that any employee found treating a client with bias would face immediate consequences. Naomi read the statement while sitting in her suite in Geneva, sipping an espresso as she prepared for her meeting. It was a start. It wasn't justice. Not fully, not until the culture changed. Not until people like Benson weren't just disciplined but weren't hired in the first place. But it was a crack in the system. And cracks? Cracks let the light in. The call to action. Naomi's story isn't just about one woman standing up for herself. It's about every single person who has ever been underestimated, doubted, or told they didn't belong. It's about the fight to be seen, to be respected, to be treated as equal, not just in words, but in action. Because let's be honest, how many of us have walked into rooms where people silently questioned why we were there? How many of us have had to work twice as hard, achieve twice as much, just to get the same respect? How many of us have swallowed our frustration, smiled through our anger, and carried the weight of proving ourselves over and over again? Enough. It's time to change the narrative. It's time to demand better. It's time to make it clear, we belong. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to fight for your place, let us know in the comments. If you've ever had to prove yourself when you shouldn't have had to, drop a fire in the chat. And if you believe that no one should ever have to question their worth, hit the like button. Because this isn't just Naomi's story. It's yours. It's mine. It's all of ours. And together, we're making sure the world knows it. The private jet sliced through the sky at 40,000 feet. A symbol of elegance and power. But inside the cockpit, Captain Todd Benson sat stiffly. His jaw locked, his hands gripping the controls with unnecessary force. He had spent the first hour of the flight seething. his mind looping over his confrontation with Naomi Carter. The way she had spoken to him. The way she had refused to shrink under his scrutiny. It was infuriating. Who did she think she was? Todd had been flying private jets for over 15 years, serving some of the wealthiest people in the world. He had built a career on knowing the elite, understanding them, predicting their needs. He had flown for CEOs, dignitaries, celebrities, people who made Naomi's wealth look like pocket change. And never, not once, had he been made to feel like he was the one who didn't belong. Until today. The call that changed everything. The in-flight phone rang, breaking through the tense silence in the cockpit. Todd sighed heavily and reached for it, expecting routine instructions from ground control. Instead, a clipped, authoritative voice met his ears. "Captain Benson, this is Michael Connors, CEO of Elite Aviation." Todd's stomach dropped. "Sir," he said quickly, straightening in his seat, "I wasn't expecting." "No, I imagine you weren't." Connors cut in, his tone razor sharp. "I received a report from Naomi Carter this morning regarding your conduct at the terminal. I've personally reviewed the complaint, and I want to make something very clear: this is unacceptable." A cold sweat broke out across Todd's forehead. "Sir, with all due respect." "No," Connors interrupted, "I don't think you understand. We have a reputation to uphold. Captain, Elite Aviation serves some of the most powerful individuals in the world. We provide more than just flights, we provide trust, discretion, and professionalism. And today, you failed on all accounts." Todd gritted his teeth, his heart pounding now. "Sir, I meant no disrespect to Miss Carter. I simply... You questioned her legitimacy. You implied she didn't belong. And worst of all, you let your personal biases affect your professionalism. Do you have any idea how damaging that is to our reputation?" Todd swallowed hard, his mind racing. I understand your concerns, sir, but I've given this company 15 years of service. Surely. And you just threw those 15 years away." The words hit Todd like a physical blow. His hands tightened around the armrest of his seat, his breathing shallow. "Sir, please, I've dedicated my entire career to. Your career with Elite Aviation is over." "Captain Benson." Silence. Complete, crushing silence. Todd felt the floor drop out from under him. "Upon landing in Geneva, you will report directly to our corporate office. Effective immediately. You are suspended from duty pending formal termination proceedings. You will not be returning as a pilot for Elite Aviation." His mind went blank. Just like that? 15 years. Gone. "Sir, please reconsider." There's nothing to reconsider," Connors said coldly. "This is a non-negotiable decision. You have exactly 1 hour left in that cockpit. Make sure it's the last professional flight you ever take with us." And then, just like that, the line went dead. The freefall begins. Todd sat completely still, the weight of his fate settling over him like an avalanche. He had always believed himself untouchable. He had always assumed that his experience, his tenure, his connections in the industry would protect him. But now, he was just another cautionary tale. A man who had underestimated the power of the wrong person. A man who had let arrogance cost him everything. The flight feels endless. The remaining hour of the flight was the longest of Todd's life. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the controls, his co-pilot casting him nervous glances but saying nothing. Todd's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. Could he appeal to the board? Could he spin this? Could he convince them that Naomi had overreacted? But deep down, he knew the truth. There was no saving this. Because Naomi Carter was not just another passenger. She was powerful, connected, respected, and worst of all, she had been right. The landing, and the end of the line. The plane touched down in Geneva with practiced precision. But for the first time in his career, Todd felt no pride in a smooth landing. The moment the wheels hit the tarmac, his fate was sealed. When the doors opened, Naomi Carter was the first to step off the jet. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. She had won this battle without ever needing to raise her voice. Todd remained in his seat, staring at the horizon as the realization fully settled in. He had lost, not just his job, not just his career, but his entire perception of control. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be on the other side, to be questioned, doubted, dismissed. And for the first time in 15 years, Todd Benson felt small. The lesson of power and respect. Naomi's story isn't just about one man facing consequences. It's about what happens when power meets arrogance and wins. It's about demanding respect, not asking for it. It's about proving that bias, discrimination, and prejudice are no match for confidence, strength, and resilience. Because the truth is, there are thousands of Todd Bensons in the world. Men who think power belongs only to them. Men who look at women like Naomi Carter and assume they don't belong. But Naomi's story? It's a reminder that no one, no matter how high they think they stand, is beyond accountability. Your turn to speak. If you've ever been underestimated, doubted, or dismissed because of who you are, this story is for you. If you've ever watched someone try to question your worth and had to fight twice as hard to prove yourself, drop a comment below. If you believe that justice means standing up for yourself even when the world tells you to be quiet, hit the like button. And if you're ready for more stories of power, resilience, and justice, subscribe now. Because this isn't just Naomi's story. It's yours. And together, we're changing the game. Naomi Carter's flight landed in Geneva. But the storm she had set in motion was only beginning. She had won her battle. But now she was thinking about the war. Because this wasn't just about her. This was about every person who had ever walked into a room and felt the weight of doubt pressing against them. Every woman, every person of color, every self-made success who had been silently questioned, subtly disrespected, and systematically overlooked. Naomi knew that her confrontation with Captain Todd Benson was just a small piece of a much larger problem, one that extended beyond one man, beyond one company. It was about an entire system that had been designed to keep people like her on the outside looking in. And she wasn't going to let it go unanswered. The call that set it all in motion. The morning after she arrived in Geneva, Naomi received a call from Michael Connors, CEO of Elite Aviation. Naomi. His voice came through the speaker. Careful, measured. I want to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. Naomi leaned back in her chair, staring out at the snow-capped Swiss mountains beyond her hotel window. An apology is nice, Michael, she said evenly, but it's not enough. A pause, then a sigh. I figured you'd say that, he admitted, which is why we're making changes. Naomi's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. What kind of changes? Effective immediately. We're implementing mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all flight staff. We're also reviewing our hiring practices to ensure that we're promoting people who reflect the values we claim to stand for. And Naomi, Captain Benson will never fly for us again. Naomi exhaled slowly. She should have felt satisfied. But all she felt was exhaustion. Because why did it always have to come to this? Why did it take public confrontation, a near scandal, and the threat of losing a high-profile client for companies to do the bare minimum? It's a start, Naomi said finally. But I'll be watching, Michael. And if I hear even one more story like mine, I promise you, this won't end with just another internal review. Michael let out a quiet chuckle, though there was a nervous edge to it. I have no doubt about that. Naomi. The ripple effect, a system that could no longer ignore change. Naomi didn't stop there. She didn't just demand change at Elite Aviation, she started conversations in other industries too. She reached out to other luxury service providers, private jet companies, 5-star resorts, high-end brands, and made it very clear that the world was watching. And you know what happened? They listened. Because when people like Naomi, powerful, successful, respected people, spoke up, the industry had no choice but to take notice. Other black entrepreneurs, women executives, and self-made CEOs started sharing their own experiences. The quiet discrimination, the lingering doubts, the accidental assumptions. Naomi's story wasn't an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a widespread, deeply ingrained issue. And now? It couldn't be ignored anymore. Elite Aviation's decision to overhaul their hiring and training practices set a precedent. Other companies followed, and slowly, too slowly. But still, change started happening. Because Naomi hadn't just forced one man to be held accountable. She had forced an entire industry to confront its own biases. More than just a victory, a call to action. Naomi Carter didn't need the world's approval. She didn't need validation. She had built her empire without permission. But she knew that real power wasn't just about her own success. It was about clearing the path for those who would come after her. And that was a responsibility she refused to ignore. Because it shouldn't take being rich and powerful for people to be treated with respect. Because it shouldn't take public humiliation for companies to start doing the right thing. Because no one should have to prove they belong in a space they've already earned their place in. Now it's your turn. Naomi's story isn't just about her. It's about all of us. If you've ever been made to feel like you had to work twice as hard to prove yourself, drop a comment below. If you've ever been underestimated, let us know. If you believe that change only happens when we demand it, hit the like button. And if you're ready for more stories about resilience, justice, and triumph, subscribe now. Because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. The sun had barely begun to rise over the Geneva skyline when Naomi Carter stepped onto the balcony of her penthouse suite. Inhaling the crisp morning air. Below her, the city buzzed with quiet energy, cars moving through winding streets. The distant hum of conversation in cafes. The soft lapping of water along the edge of Lake Geneva. It was a peaceful contrast to the storm she had ignited in the corporate aviation world just days before. But Naomi Carter had never been one to chase peace. She chased justice. She chased progress. She chased change. And she had achieved it. Her battle with Captain Todd Benson and Elite Aviation had been more than just a personal victory. It had rippled through an entire industry, forcing companies to rethink how they treated their clients, their employees, their corporate culture. The aviation world had been shaken by the fallout. But Naomi wasn't celebrating the destruction of an outdated system. She was celebrating the rebuilding of a better one. Because that was what real power looked like. Not just winning battles, but shifting landscapes. Not just breaking through barriers, but tearing them down so others never had to face them again. The aftermath, a new standard in the aviation industry. In the days following her confrontation with Benson, Elite Aviation had been forced to act quickly. They knew they couldn't afford to bury the story or brush it aside, not when Naomi Carter, one of the most influential black businesswomen in the world, was watching their every move. Michael Connors, their CEO, had made a public statement, a carefully crafted response acknowledging the failure, promising change. We recognize that unconscious bias has no place in our company, and we are committed to ensuring that every client, regardless of background, is treated with the respect and professionalism they deserve. Effective immediately. We are implementing mandatory diversity training, re-evaluating our hiring processes, and ensuring accountability at all levels of our organization. Naomi had read the statement while sipping her morning coffee. It was a step in the right direction, but words meant nothing without action. So she did what she always did. She held them accountable. She demanded evidence, proof that these policies were more than just PR damage control. And, to her surprise, Elite Aviation delivered. They fired Captain Benson permanently, stating that any employee found engaging in discriminatory behavior would face immediate termination. They created a new executive role focused solely on diversity and inclusion, a role Naomi had personally influenced through her negotiations. And, perhaps most importantly, they opened a new client relations program designed to amplify the voices of underrepresented business owners, executives, and entrepreneurs in the luxury aviation space. It wasn't just about fixing what had happened to Naomi. It was about preventing it from happening to anyone else. And when other private aviation companies saw what was happening, they followed suit. Because when one industry leader changes, the rest scrambled to keep up. Naomi had set a new standard, and the industry would never be the same again. The bigger picture, more than just a jet. But Naomi's fight had never been about just one flight. It wasn't about a single bad pilot. It wasn't about a single company's policies. It was about something much bigger. It was about the systemic barriers that black women, women of color, and self-made entrepreneurs faced every single day. It was about the countless moments of doubt, the condescending smiles, the unspoken disbelief whenever she walked into a room full of people who had never expected someone like her to sit at their table, let alone own the table itself. It was about the women who would come after her. Because Naomi knew that she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the next black woman who would step onto a private jet, sign a billion-dollar deal, launch a global empire, and refuse to be questioned. She was clearing a path. And she was doing it so no one else had to fight this same battle ever again. The lesson we all need to learn. So what can we take from Naomi Carter's story? Because this isn't just about private jets and luxury industries. This is about every person who has ever been underestimated. This is about every time someone doubted you, not because of your abilities, but because of their own biases. This is about every moment you've had to fight twice as hard, work twice as long, achieve twice as much, just to be taken seriously. This is about the battles you've fought in silence, the rooms you've walked into where you felt out of place, the times you've been questioned, overlooked, dismissed. And this is a reminder. You don't need permission to exist in spaces you've already earned your place in. You don't need to justify your success to anyone. You don't need to prove yourself to people who will never see past their own ignorance. The only thing you need to do? Keep winning. Keep pushing. Keep breaking barriers until they no longer exist. Because when one of us rises, we all rise. And Naomi Carter? She didn't just rise. She soared. Now, it's your turn. Naomi's fight isn't just hers. It's ours. If you've ever had to fight for your place in a world that underestimated you, let us know in the comments. If you've ever had someone question your worth, drop a fire below. If you believe that real change only happens when we demand it, hit that like button. And if you want more stories of resilience, justice, and triumph, stories that remind us that we belong, that we are powerful, that we will not be silenced, subscribe now. Because this is just the beginning. And together, we are unstoppable.